But there were these moments where the music was like related to the subject matter in ways that felt really serendipitous, and like that's when the work is the most fun for me, is when I can find these little connections to kind of plant the seed to the listener of like, oh, was this intentional? Are these related? Mostly like it's a dialogue, this like harmony throughout the whole piece of the music and the words. And it was really fun to kind of edit and weave them together and see how they might relate.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Current Art Podcast. And today I'm with my friend, the creator of the sound walk, Megan Hattie Stahl.
Yes, hello. I'm so happy to be on Current Art Podcast, finally.
Yay!
Been a fan for a long time.
Oh, I need to amplify this one sentence. Oh, Megan, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and about your project?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Megan. I am a media artist and educator living in New York City on and off for 7 years about. And I'm from Oregon originally, and used to be a filmmaker. And now I'm really interested in place-based sound and sound walks and kind of multi-sensory audio experiences.
A lot of the projects that I'm interested in making have to do with music.
Yes.
And not just including music in them, but learning about music history and the people that make music and why, and just how music can be symbolic, I think, and represent more than just music. It's like a way to connect people, and it's a way to communicate culture. It's like an emotional outlet. I think music honestly has everything inside it. So, yeah.
And it's also very abstract. It's a very abstract form of art.
Music?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It might be the reason that I sing out of tune. So I even though I learn violin, I often call it chainsaw. But I realized my intonation was so bad, I could not remember the melody unless it's repeated for thousands of times.
When you sing or when you play?
Both.
Oh,
So it is very difficult for me to remember any notes, but I also realize every time I encounter a music piece, even though I've heard of that before, each time it gives me a new experience.
Yeah, I think like music can be taught in a way that's very like rigid and strict, and I don't agree with that personally. And I think like, yeah, every time you play something, it's going to sound different, and I think that's good. Like that's improvisation and variation, and like same with walking. It's like every time you do a sound walk, it's going to depend on the weather and how you're feeling, and you can't have the same experience twice. So
that's very interesting. Yeah, I was listening to your sound walk, a serious music with Bea Witkin.
What interested me most about her was Beatrice Witkin was that she was most well known for her electronic music.
Yes.
And I'm really interested in electronic music and electronic music history.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, this is another one of those women that was like an early electronic music person in New York, because I knew about others, but I'd never heard of her. And so then I was like reading her Wikipedia page, and it said, yes, she did electronic music, but also there were all these other decades before and after that where it's like she was doing other things, where it's like an electronic musician who, she was working with synthesizers in the 60s and 70s. It's like, what about before the 60s, So then I was like, how does this whole career unfold? Getting in touch with her son, Steve, who, because, I think when you're researching someone, it's helpful to interview someone who actually knew them to give some kind of more texture to the story. He had these date books or diaries that he wanted to. He typed up some of them, but not all of them. So he chose a few that he thought were very interesting or important, and he typed those up and shared those with me. So the stuff from the project is kind of pre-curated by him. Like, he decided what was most interesting and significant to him, and then that's what I was able to include, because I can't read her handwriting very well, so I could only use the stuff that he had typed up for me. I feel very lucky to have his trust and, have permission to use all these recordings. Is like, it's like a dream come true for a documentary maker to have, like, I don't know, carte blanche, is that the right word? Whereas I have all these recordings and I can use them however I want. The first thing that kind of struck me about how hard it was Steve telling me, she was always struggling to get her music performed, finding funding, there's a lot that goes into from when a piece comes out of your head onto the paper to actually hearing it in person or having it recorded. Like, a lot of pieces just never get that far. So I was really interested in, like, learning more about that process, and also just the struggles of some conflicts with her husband, and it just made me curious about that, because she got married in the 1930s, I believe. And she wrote in this autobiography that her NYU graduate studies were interrupted by marriage. And so I was like, is that serious? Like, what does she mean? Like, she didn't elaborate, so I don't know, but it made me feel like, I just, like, as a woman in the 21st century, when I think about women from the past, I just think about how active were these choices to get married and stuff. Like, I don't know, but it's interesting to me.
It is almost 100 years later.
Yeah.
When we talk about her. But we are still, I think, struggling with very similar things.
Yes.
Getting the grants. To be able to be presented. To have the opportunity to show our work.
Funding.
And then, but also, sometimes struggling in the relationships.
Yes. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarity.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Did you find something that really struck you that was very outside of box thinking or outside of your imagination, the thing that happens to her?
One thing that was really powerful for me was thinking about the differences between her and her husband, as you can hear in the third part, where he was an engineer and he was very kind of type A, like, you have to do things this way, and she was very, like, free, and she would sit at the synthesizer and improvise for a long time. And, like, that was, my impression is that was annoying to her husband, that he couldn't understand her kind of different way of approaching music. And I've thought about how music was kind of like her little zone of autonomy, that she was like, she may have struggled in her marriage, but music was her thing. Like, she could go there and be kind of free in that container of, like, her creative process.
Also, that was one of the strongest parts in the whole soundtrack. When we stand in front of her apartment, that you ask somebody to write out her diary about a moment where she was receiving a lot of judgments from her husband. And then the sound is, like, spatialized, so it's coming out from one ear to another. They're a little bit overlapping, fast-paced, and following with electronic music, probably she composed.
Yeah.
And it's very powerful in that way. But also, when I think about like our physical environment was also extremely interesting, because I think it's by coincidence in front of her apartment there's like this scaffolding, and I feel like we are living in that container at that moment. We are staying in that container at that moment to experience what happened to her like 100 years ago. And it can happen still in all of those windows in the building that...
Yeah, you never know what's happening. I mean, there's a whole part in that section about how music is leaky and, like, we can hear each other. Like, people who are practicing music can be overheard really easily, and there's no way to prevent that. And the same thing goes for just living in New York City. Like, in close quarters, we can hear our neighbors' intimate moments.
Yes.
And that's like something we can try to ignore, or, you know, on the subway, you're like trying not to overhear somebody's conversation, but you do. And just like what we are able to hear and not hear, and the difference between hearing and listening, and like all these things I'm trying to kind of get people to think about. This moment of abuse, someone probably heard it in the building because there were dishes breaking. You know, it's really hard for me to think about that. It's really hard to do that part, work on that part. That's something that, so Steve, the son, that was one of the sections of the diary that he typed up. So obviously it was important to him, even though it was about his father, you know. And for the voices in that, my friend Shira was the voice of Bea, her diaries, and then you can hear a doubling of the voice on 2 occasions when she's quoting him, when he says, "I hate electronics," and "Where's my bread?" And for that voice, it's actually my dad's voice, because I asked him to record it, and I asked Steve if he would record it, and he said no, because it was his dad.
I really like your choices when you present the third part, which is when we stand in front of her apartment. They were like a very confusing part of the electronic music piece that Bea composed. It's almost like heavy metal or something. Yeah, I'm not music major, so I cannot describe it very well, but it is interesting to connect, like trying to connect that part of the emotion from the artist.
It seemed like sonically the music that's in that part is a synthesizer, like she's trying different versions of a piece that was a theme song for a show called The Wild Wild World of Animals, and there were a couple of reel-to-reel tapes that were just like a half hour of her like playing different variations on these same chords. So it's all that piece which is underneath, and there were some moments that I think just happened to work really well with what was happening in the script. Like when we first talk about how her husband got what kept her from, Steve says that her husband may have kept her from doing her best work, and the stress of him prevented her from having a better career or something. He says something like that. And we have this thing where it's like, and so then later I was like, oh, that sounds like a fly buzzing in her ear. That's her husband. And I was like, wow, I like this. I didn't plan it, but there were these moments where the music was like related to the subject matter in ways that felt really serendipitous. And like, that's when the work is the most fun for me, is when I can find these little connections to kind of plant the seed to the listener of like, oh, was this intentional? Are these related? Mostly like it's a dialogue, this like harmony throughout the whole piece of the music and the words. And it was really fun to kind of edit and weave them together and see how they might relate.
But how did you structure the whole route?
Yeah, I definitely knew I wanted to go to her old apartment building at 103rd and West End. And then the overlook at Riverside Park, the second location, you can see all the sports fields. And Steve played baseball there as a kid, so that seemed like a good spot. And then Straus Park is just beautiful, so I like that. And then the Riverside Bench one, that was the last location that I decided on. I was going to try to find this statue. There's some kind of statue in Riverside Park. It's like a tribute to someone. I can't remember who, but I couldn't find it. So I was like, if I can't find it, then no one else is going to find it. So then I found this little area where there's benches right on the river, and that seemed really right to me because of my connection to sitting by rivers, and also that way it kind of becomes a climb. Like, I like how it starts at the lowest elevation by the river, and then you're gradually going up. You see the sports fields below, then you're taking some stairs, you're going to the apartment building, and then you're walking north to Straus Park. So I like the idea that it was like a climb. Because I was also thinking about musically. There's a string quartet piece called The Cantillations of the Bible that is heard in the fourth part. And I also had different musicians recording parts from that piece on different instruments. And that's what you hear when you're walking between the locations, is musicians playing that piece. And so I like the idea of thinking of the first part, we're going to hear the cello part, so the lowest of the piece, and then we're going to hear the viola part, which is a little bit higher, and with staff, and then we'll hear the two violin parts. And I didn't end up structuring it that way in the end, but that's how I was thinking about it, where it's like, it's 4 locations, it's 4 movements, it's 4 kind of thinking of it like as a musical composition, where it's like the lowest notes, then the mid notes, and then the high notes. And I don't think it turned out that way exactly, but that was kind of how I wanted to think about it, like a foundation and then building upon it.
My dear listener, what you just heard is a section of the recording Megan Hattie Stahl used in her sound walk, Serious Music with Bea Witkin. Serious Music with Bea Witkin. This recording called Cantillations of the Bible. And I have a good news for you. There's actually a free link for people to sign up for the soft launch weekend from December 13th to December 15th, 2024. And the link is bit.ly/serious music preview. bit.ly/serious music preview. Serious Music Preview has to be all lowercase, and I will also link it below. So thank you, and the podcast continued. I really like the river scene.
So in this October, Megan invited several of us to do the beta testing. So we started in Riverside Park near West 96th Street. We started by sitting on a lawn and gaze into nothing. Not even a statue, not even a person, not even a bench. We don't know what we are actually looking at. So we started with this very beautiful abstract painting, and everybody can insert their own personal story inside. And later on, Megan asked me, "Is that river reminds you of something?" Yes, it reminds me of when I was living in Antalya, Turkey. And there's a very foggy morning. When I gaze into the ocean, I saw like a expanding blue colors, and all the mountains behind the ocean is just blurry, and we can only see the outline. And I believe many of other beta testers has built their own memories and own understanding of pianist and electronic composer Bea Witkin's work. So I hope you can also find your own understanding and own experience.
I like the in-betweenness that you direct us to walk on like very specific path, even to, press the button on the street to signal the light, the traffic light. And I was thinking about, wow, I hope I can do more of this kind of sound walk in New York. I know one in Greenwood Cemetery,
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
It's really good.
Yeah, but I hope that, I can discover the city all the time in this way.
Yeah, me too. That's kind of my dream, is that the whole city will be overlaid with sound experiences. Like, not that we do those all the time, but that you can if you want to. And it's like something I get really excited thinking about is how whenever you have this place-based sound experience, you're kind of ingraining or encoding the sound memories into your body and associating them with that place. And so whenever you go there later, like even if you're not listening, it'll be activated in you, and you'll be like, oh yeah, I heard this piece of music here, and or this sound walk here, and you'll remember. Your body will remember, even if you don't remember. Like, I think that's so cool.
Yeah, and I really liked what you talk about, like the experience in different time space. And I'm thinking about like our city is like layers of histories, and it's interesting to think about, wow, 100 years ago, Beatrice Witkin has been there and played this piano in her apartment, and then to imagine how the street looked like and how her environment construct for her, and then to think about, okay, 100 years later, will also be many people passing by. And then probably also listen to your sound walk from 100 years ago.
Maybe.
Yeah. We will all died, but
yeah,
it will stay there.
Yeah, that's what's cool to think about too, is like you all were having, and I'd be curious to hear about your experience as a beta tester, but there were like, I think 15 people at the event, and everyone had their own individual experience, but at the same time, you had the same experience as these other people, and like you formed a collective audience in a way, even though you were on your own device, on your own headphones. And like, I like the idea that everyone who does this walk will be joining like a legacy of other people who've done the walk. So it's like you have something in common. I mean, I guess my dream would be like that so many people do it that later in life they'll meet someone and they'll talk about it and they'll be like, oh yeah, I did that sound walk too. And then, I don't know. That's my dream.
Will happen.
That would be cool. And like, I do hope to release, I mean, I'm still finishing it now for my thesis in December, but I want to find a way to get this to a wider audience and have like some kind of a local partner to co-present it with me so that it can get more attention. And
what you said is actually very, very interesting about you want to include more story from her side. It's interesting to think about that way, that we are having different titles. It can be musician, composer, artist, and mom, and somebody's wife, somebody's blah, blah, blah. And then those titles kind of all add a weight on us, and also like kind of camouflage our own true identity, which is just a person, that a real human being that has their very uniqueness and strangeness, and that I think we can say we are our struggles, but we are also our like strangeness, like weirdness in some way. I think it's always interesting when I encounter artists, I find what is weird about this person.
in a good way.
Yeah, in a good way,
Yeah.
or in a non-judgmental way. I'm not thinking about, oh, that might be good or bad, but just something that I think is closely related to that person. And what is the emotional journey for you to like work on this piece?
Oh my God. So
It's a heavy, still heavy.
yeah, I mean, this project has taken an extra 7 months for me to finish. I was supposed to finish in May because you're supposed to finish your thesis in 1 school year.
Yeah.
But I ended up extending to December because something I realized was I can't do 2 really intensive projects in 2 months. Like, they have to be spaced out more.
Yeah.
Because in the spring I was working on this wine audio documentary that was like completely self-produced, and I was really overwhelmed by the amount of archival material that I had, and I was struggling with a lot of resistance, as I've read about in the book The War of Art. And resistance is basically like the fear of failure, so it keeps you from showing up to work on your art, basically. And so I was like, thinking of any reason not to work on this project because I was so scared that it wouldn't live up to the vision I have in my head. And I was also going through a breakup like almost a year ago. It was really hard to focus on things, and sometimes my creative work was like a healthy kind of therapeutic outlet, and other times it was just really difficult. So I had to really slow down and take care of myself for a lot of the past year. But then it was just a question of like having deadlines, having this beta test a couple weeks ago to be like, okay, this is serious. I have to actually do this. And then just, sitting at my desk, setting timers, chipping away bit by bit, like really thinking about one thing at a time, starting to like meditate a lot. Like, it was all about kind of like self-care. And I think especially with thesis projects in our program, Natalie from the IMA will always say, like, it doesn't have to be the biggest, best project you ever make. It's just your next project. And so I would go back to that and be like, okay, literally, I just have to finish this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Because if I'm just like, oh, it has to be perfect, like, then it'll never get done. So it's been a very long journey that's not over yet, but it feels good to have, like, gotten this far. But yeah, it's been a very long journey. And I lost steam a lot along the way.
Yeah.
The thing about thesis, and you started thesis, so but it's kind of like always there in the background. And like, even just living your life could count as working on thesis, I think. because you're like thinking about it, and you might have an idea, and then you need to write it down. Like, it's just an ambient sort of process. So I don't know if you've experienced that yet, where it's like,
Oh, I experience that all the time.
yeah,
Because yesterday, me and Nate, we were talking about like doing freelance work or creative work. Is that it's always on the back of your mind. Like I go to sleep every single day, think about podcasts.
yeah,
It's like there's not even a moment where my mind wasn't shut down for this or any other project I'm doing.
yeah,
It's always there,
yeah.
like clenching your neck.
Well,
I
that
mean-
sounds kind of intense, but
Just joking. Clenching my neck maybe is a little bit joking, but it's always like at the back of my mind. Yeah, I even started to dream about podcasts. It's like,
I've been there.
yeah, it's like you just think about it too much.
Yeah,
Because it's important. It's part of you, and it's part of your identity. It's like Beatrice Witkin is part of her identity, like her music. When you struggle to find a voice that's closest to her, or when you don't know what is the textures of her voice. So, but then she has her work as her voice.
oh yeah,
And it's really cathartic at the end of the sound walk, which we are like standing in the Straus Park. When we have the moment to stare at the statue and the sun is shining and to hear about what she was saying in her diary, that we are our own composer of our life.
you're the god of your composition.
Yeah, that's
But
more
yes, you're
accurate.
taking it to another level, which is we are composing our life, which, yes, she doesn't say that, but that's an interesting place to take it. Yeah.
I mean, it's just direct translation in my mind to think like that. Inaccuracy creates another layer of meaning. But I don't know if we take that agency a lot. I don't know if in our life that we know we have this choice or we know that we are the composer or director.
Yeah. Yeah, this makes me think about how certain times throughout my process when I felt like I was communicating with her, particularly this is not exactly related to what you were just saying, but in January I was dog sitting in Carroll Gardens, and I was working a lot on transcribing the manuscripts, so the handwritten composition of the cantillations. I was putting it into Sibelius, which is a music notation software, and it took me hours and hours to try to read her handwriting, or I think it was her husband's handwriting, and try to put the notes into the software and like make the measures make sense, because it was kind of hard to read and it was very complicated. And at that point, I felt like I was communicating with her directly, where I was just kind of like, what are you trying to say here? Like, what does this say? Like, and it felt like she was alive I was communing with the dead or something. And it was so interesting
Spiritual.
and powerful. And it was very cold outside and snowy at times. And it was like, I didn't think I would be needing to do that as part of this project. But yeah, you are the god of your composition. That part is really cool, because she wrote that, and I think that was advice that she got from one of her teachers. So yeah, that's one of my favorite parts.
I think it must took her some time to arrive at that concept.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she wrote that in the 1980s. So she was already, in her 60s, 70s, late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, I like this emotional journey to imagine your life and her life intertwined all together.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. It's like a symphony.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very honored because is this your first podcast episode talking about this project?
Yes, hopefully first of many.
Yes, first of many. So first podcast episode, Megan is on Current Art Podcast.
No, I really appreciate you giving me the space to talk about this when it's so fresh, and I'm glad you were there. And yeah, when this comes out, it'll probably be different project, slightly different. So I'm excited for people to experience it in all different kinds of weather and times of day. And yeah, thank you.
So thank you so much for watching and listening. I will see you next week. And we are available on YouTube Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Pocket Podcasts. And thank you so much, Megan.
Thank
See
you.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
I mean, this may be a small bonus gift for our female audience who is actually could possibly struggling with complicated creative issues and also personal issues. Can you just give us a bonus, like maybe like a motivation note?
You can only do this kind of project if you are able to think like big and small at the same time, and just take things step by step, and also just always be writing down ideas that you have. Like, have a way to take notes throughout your life and take things like breath by breath, step by step.
That's a big note and small note at the same time. It's both practical and philosophical. It's a great note for our female audience.
Also, read The Art of Living by Thich Nhat Hanh.
It's beautiful when you say that. When you said that, it's like small step by step, because when I was imagining that your creative journey of finishing this work, it's really difficult. You're just building a small monument, one step after the other.
Monument. Yes, I love that word. Yeah.
Yeah, it's maybe for somebody it means completely different things, but our small step is very important to us, and it's important to acknowledge that it's always important.
Yeah, and another book that I really enjoyed reading in the past year was The Philosophy of Walking by Frédéric Gros, and it's translated from French, was the version I read, but there's this line about how once man takes one step, he does not remain where he is, where it's like, I think I've spent a lot of time feeling stuck, especially in the past year, and it's like, all you have to do is take one step forward, like get out of your house, come to this park. Like, I came to this park a lot.
What is the name of this park again?
Irving Square Park.
Irving Square Park. Very good.
Yeah. Part of me doesn't want to share the park's name, but I just did.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah. And also, like, in terms of rivers, like, go to the river. The river is amazing because it's moving, even though you're not. So it's like, there's a sense of motion and peace and repetition, but it's also, like, peaceful.
Like Current
Art Podcast.
Yes, exactly. It's important to put the advertisement at the end. I love what you were saying. And it struck me too by what you said before. When you find things are difficult, you just need to breathe. Like, you just need to breathe second by second, like, or millisecond by millisecond.
Yeah.
You just need to get over that minute, that it will be all right later on.
That's all you can really do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are many moments in our life, we are feeling that we are standing on the cliff or on the edge of cliff. And it takes a lot of courage to walk back, to calm yourself down and then to enjoy that cliff and to not be scared by the weight and of your body, and then to not scared by the danger of falling.